This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
Environmental and economic problems associated with the rapid growth of the world's population. Scholars and thinkers are considering the possible models that allow eliminating the crisis at least partially. In her article entitled Lifeboat Ethics, The Case Against Helping the Poor, Garrett Hardin presents a scholarly approach to the existing state-of-the-art in international relations and how the support of poor countries enables the misuse of limited resources. The author argues that wealthier states should not provide financial and food aid to poor countries, nor should they let in vast numbers of immigrants from the developing world, as it will result in planet overpopulation and exhaustion of the leading resources. The author successfully defines most concepts and ideas she puts forth. First of all, the main idea of the lifeboat is explained at the very beginning of the paper. There is a limited number of people a boat can take aboard, so if viewing the situation from the Christian perspective and saving everyone, the rescuers are likely to swamp along with the rescued. Similarly, helping poor nations automatically means multiplying their populations, which will need increasingly more aid and making extensive use of exhaustible resources. The concept of the tragedy of the commons is also described clearly, so one can understand from the article that if everyone has unlimited access to a particular resource, joint possession will soon disappear due to its misuse. The Chinese fish metaphor is also elucidated and effectively put into context. It is much more helpful to teach a person or a whole nation to provide for themselves instead of turning them into dependents. However, the spaceship argument the scholar seeks to repudiate is not defined clearly, so the reader can only suppose what the spaceship model is. Although the author, in general, builds her argument logically and makes each link explicit, there are several unstated points the author probably believes are common knowledge. First of all, the author doesn't note the threat of global warming as a serious environmental issue, closing it with human economic activity. Because the human population is growing, economic activity is intensifying to meet the needs of this vast global community. At the same time, with the expansion of economic activity, air pollution becomes more evident, so the author relies on this fact, stating that resources are vanishing quickly with population boosting. As it has been proven above, this assumption is logical and accurate. However, there is one substantial fallacy in reasoning. The author implies that developing nations will remain dependent on the wealthy world for centuries and fail to learn to build their infrastructure from the inside. Therefore, the author underestimates the object of her criticism and approaches it as unable to gain new skills at the national level. In addition, the author is not entirely objective, as she fails to provide the positive progress developing states are making in terms of self-regulation. For instance, in African countries and India, birth control campaigns have a 30-40-year history, so it is important to understand that they are not mere consumers of the West's food but also independent and intelligent structures that can fix their internal problems with the support of the civilized world. It also needs to be noted that the author approaches immigration in a biased way and reduces it to mere recruiting of cheap workforce from poor countries. In fact, the issue is much more complex in the context of developed countries like the United States, which have to put so many resources into people arriving in the country in order to ensure they adapt adequately and become faithful members of the wealthy nation, not the poor community. For the first years after moving abroad, such people really do non-qualified work, but the fact of their immigration proves that they seek success and finally obtain it by gaining additional education and making a career. Therefore, the evidence about immigration is not actually true. Did you like this Lifeboat Ethics, the case against helping the poor sample? To get more works like this one, make sure to check out the database of academic paper examples at ivypanda.com. You will find thousands of samples for all your study needs.